Och med det så ska vi dra igång dagen på riktigt och faktiskt bli lite allvarligare. Och vi ska börja med det skrämmande säkerhetsläget i Europa. Drygt 3 månader har gått sedan Ryssland invaderade Ukraina och det finns ännu inga som helst tecken på en fredlig diplomatisk lösning. And our first guest has spent several years focusing on European politics. His book, The Age of Unpeace, from September last year, has proven to be almost disturbingly relevant. Please give a warm welcome to Mark Leonard, Director of the Pan-European think tank, European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome, Mark, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Mark, in your book, you're talking about hyperconnectivity and that it's driving us apart instead of bringing everlasting peace, which we might have hoped for. Could you give us some concrete examples of what you mean?
Sure. So after the end of the Cold War, we were told that the world would be bound together through global trade and technology and the internet and travel and all sorts of other things, which would seem to be shrinking the world. And that has happened in many ways. But at the same time, all of those same forces both seem to be making people angrier and more polarized, but also all of those things which were meant to be creating harmony are now becoming weapons and tools of power. And we can see that instead of talking about closer trading relationships, we're talking about sanctions and energy cutoffs. Instead of talking about the internet providing us with a global demos, what we have is cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. Even the movement of people has been turned into a weapon. One of the things that people are most nervous about is the way that Putin seems to be driving people out of their homes in Ukraine as a way of creating political problems in the European countries that are supporting Ukraine. And so we're seeing how all of the things that bind us together are in fact now being turned into weapons to hurt us. And that is quite a scary thing for the people who were so optimistic about the creation of one world at the end of the Cold War.
Would you say that these negative effects could have been predicted?
I think that throughout that process, we have been aware of some of the downsides of connectivity. In the 90s, there were big discussions about globalization and anti-globalization movements in Seattle and places like that. And people were aware of the inequality that was being created in our societies. I think that that came to a head in 2008 when people basically realized that there were big winners and big losers. And even if globalization had been very good for the world, there were a lot of people who lost out. And then in 2015, we had a big lesson with the refugee crisis, where many people in the beginning of the crisis wanted to open their houses and they were opening their hearts to people moving. But it sort of showed also that the people moving can be complicated. And we saw some of these tensions that come about from connectivity between the winners and losers crystallized with Brexit in the UK, with Trump in America. And every single country in the developed world has got their mini Trumps and their mini Brexiteers who are pushing for their different elements. So I think that led to people thinking differently about the idea of connectivity.
If hyperconnectivity is a reason for a world of unpeace, what is the solution? Sort of disconnection or what?
I don't think that is the solution. But in the book, actually, the metaphor I use is that where we're at in geopolitics, it's a bit like a marriage that goes wrong. So all the things that bring you together in the good times become the ways that people hurt each other in the bad times. So in a marriage, it's about who gets custody of the pet dog, who gets the holiday home, above all, who gets the children. Those are the things which are so beautiful when you're getting on well, and which you use to hurt each other when you're splitting apart. And in geopolitics, as I said, it's the same sort of things. It's our trading relationships, which now turn into sanctions and energy cutoffs. It's the internet, which now turns into a kind of way of doing cyber attacks and disinformation. It's freedom of movement, which isn't so much about going to Malaga or Ibiza, but is now about hurting people in the way that Lukashenko did when he drove refugees into Poland and Lithuania. And some people say the solution is just to cut ourselves off, to live in a kind of silo, to become North Korea. But actually, I think that would be a tragedy, because many of the most wonderful things about the world that we live in are a result of these connections. So I think it's partly about understanding that they're two sides of the same coin. All the great things that come about from hyperconnectivity also have their evil twin double that can hurt us. And what you want to do, therefore, is to look at the quality of those relationships and see if you can make it less risky. And I think we're seeing some sort of examples of that happening already. If you look at our relationship with Russia, I think, you know, we are busily decoupling from Russia in energy terms, trying to buy much less Russian oil and gas. I don't think that the big challenge is buying Russian oil and gas at all, but it's the big danger is if you put yourself in a relationship where most of your oil and gas comes from Russia, and they can literally turn the lights off in your country if you don't buy it, and that allows them to blackmail you. And we found that during COVID as well, when the Chinese started using masks and political as a way of putting pressure on countries, including Sweden, because they were doing things that the Chinese government didn't like. So ideally, I think what you need to do is to try and put yourself in relationships which are not one-sided, where you can't be bullied by the other side, but also to think heavily about who are the winners and the losers. And if these relationships are generating a lot of wealth, for example, trading relationships, how do you capture that and use it to help the people who are losing out so that they don't get angry and they don't feel left behind? With migration, for example, is a classic example. In the Brexit debate in the UK, the British economy needed lots of people to come in and work here. It made Britain much richer, much stronger. It allowed our health service to work well, the fact that there were lots of people coming from Eastern Europe. But in some communities, people felt that they were being threatened by it, because all of a sudden you had a large number of people coming in. There weren't any new school places or hospital places for them, no doctors, house prices might have gone up. And if the government had actually known where people were going and had prepared for it, they could have given extra money to the local authorities so you could have more teachers, more doctors. They could have worked out ways of protecting salaries in particular areas. But because it was not managed, therefore, you had a lot of chaos and resentment, and a lot of people felt that they'd lost out. So I think that in my book, I talk about the big challenge of our age being about disarming connectivity. And that essentially means trying to think through, how do you make it less risky so that people don't want to suddenly build walls, but they feel that there is some political control over what's going on.
And finally, Mark, for the future, are you optimistic? Do you think that the political leaders are really acting to disarm the connectivity without losing out of the things we really treasure?
I think that I'm more optimistic now than I was a few years ago. I think there's a big debate in different European countries about the idea of European sovereignty and making sure that we have a bit more control over our own affairs. I think that we had a wake-up call during COVID about how much we depended on individual countries for certain things, and that led people to think about, how do we make our own vaccines, how do we get healthy supply chains to get protective equipment. I think the debate about Russian energy is another example of us kind of moving in the right direction. I think we had a big debate about 5G technology from China and whether we could do that differently. But also people are worried about, monopoly suppliers like Facebook and Google and trying to work out different ways of making those relationships work. So I think that things are moving in the right direction. But as you see, every single time there's an election, there is a sort of depressing battle between the people who have traditionally uncritically wanted to connect ourselves with the rest of the world, and then the counter-revolutionaries, the Marine Le Pens, the Trumps, etc. And that, I think, is an unhealthy contest. A more healthy one is if you can work out different ways of getting the benefits of internationalism and connectivity, which I think have made us much richer, much both culturally as well as economically, and which ultimately I think will lead to a more peaceful world. But unless the people who want openness and connections to the rest of the world take the concerns of the losers seriously and work out ways of making interdependence safe, then you will end up with a world of walls, which I think would make us all much poorer and in fact, not safer either.
Thank you so much, Mark Leonard, for joining us and sharing today. Thank you.
Thank you.